Many in the LGBTQ community, Maria, are already at a financial disadvantage, especially trans people. What are you seeing in your work, and what are some of the implications to the trans community in this current economic climate that we're in?
I mean, just as you just said, like when you're already living on the margins, anything that hits everyone will disproportionately affect those people on the margin. And of course, I mean, there are many in the LGBTQ communities that are shut out from formal economies, for example. They don't have access to jobs. We saw this very prominently during the pandemic. We launched a research project and a fund that ended up supporting over 170,000 LGBTQ people globally. And, many people didn't have the opportunity of working from home. They cannot go back to their original families because they may have been kicked out or not welcome. And so, of course, we expect to see this over this recession and financial hardship. And I think it's important to remember that it's not just something, it's not equal for everyone. If you are already shut out, then you will be disproportionately affected, most likely. And of course, that definitely applies to trans people who have faced even more barriers when it comes to the job market, for example. So it is definitely a very serious challenge.
Right. I just want to stay in the UK a little while longer. There is a potential for a new government to be formed in the next few days, weeks, months. What would you like to see on the agenda for the government, specifically for trans rights?
I mean, the UK, I think over the last few years have really stood out when it has come to a hostile climate for trans and non-binary people. It's very unfortunate. I mean, the UK has dropped in ILGA Europe's Rainbow Index. The UK was supposed to host a global conference. It was cancelled. And really, I think the reputation of the UK when it comes to trans rights has taken a very serious hit. And I would like for the UK government to really step up, to prioritize inclusion, to value trans and non-binary people, and ensure that legally and also in the rhetoric coming out of the government that they promote inclusion and respect for trans and non-binary people.
Sure. The UK government, in fact, last year backtracked on conversion therapy, where they said that they wouldn't ban conversion therapy for transgender people. Can you talk a little bit about, in your experience, the harmful implications of conversion therapy, especially on trans youth?
Yeah, so Outright has actually done a lot of research globally around what we now call conversion practices, because no one should be fooled. There's nothing therapeutic about this. It's got nothing to do with actual therapy that, you provide therapy to people to help them. Conversion practices are really a way of trying to force change in people's sexual orientation or gender identity. And so legal bans are just one way and one avenue to curb these practices that unfortunately can create lasting harm in the people who are subject to them, whether they actually seek them out themselves or they most likely are forced to do so. And so the idea that, okay, maybe we'll have a ban on sexual for conversion practices when it comes to sexual orientation, but yeah, when it comes to gender identity, no, that's too complicated or it's not important. I mean, that just sends so much the wrong message. No one should be forced to change their, and you can't change. I mean, you have the gender identity that you have, and you need to be able to express it. You need to have it, be able to have it recognized. And so the idea that somehow we should allow people to try to change other people's gender identity, it's just wrong. And I mean, of course, I mean there has not been a ban, and it seems like rumors have it that maybe there even won't be a ban. I really hope that the UK government rethinks this and moves forward on this, because conversion practices do not belong in society anywhere, and certainly not in the UK.
You mentioned rhetoric, and I just want to move to the U.S. now, where we have seen a surge in anti-trans rhetoric and a surge in legislation as well. Bloomberg Equality ran an analysis of statewide bills that were put forth this year, and nearly 60% of them were specifically against transgender health care. What are the real-world ramifications of these bills?
So first of all, I think it's important to know that this isn't just the US, it's not just the UK. This is a global push against trans rights. And the real world ramifications, of course, is, I mean, you're literally telling people that their lives don't matter. That's the message that's being sent. And of course, the targeting of trans youth, I think it's important to know this isn't actually about protecting trans youth. This is because those who are pushing these bills have realized that there is something about, we all want to protect children, we want to protect youth, and so they have found a narrative, or they have established a narrative that is what they are doing. But they really are not. They're not trying to protect trans youth, or they are trying to attack all trans people, all non-binary people, anyone who falls outside of a rigid binary system. And that is what they're doing. But of course, in real life, it means that they are trying to take away healthcare decisions from individuals and their families, and saying, well, you can't have access to this. You can't have access to this healthcare, no matter how much you need it, no matter whether it's going to save your life or not, no matter whether it's going to give you a good life as an adult or not. We don't think that you should have access to this healthcare. It's not based on science. It's not based on, normally you wouldn't have legislation about particular kinds of healthcare that can be provided or not. This is ideological. It's not about protecting trans youth or anyone else.
And do you think that this targeting of trans people is actually succeeding in energizing the base?
Yes, unfortunately, it is. It's not just what I think. It's proven that it is working. And I mean, I'm not going to go through all the all the examples, but I mean, there's proof of surges in hateful rhetoric on social media. For example, we've seen this both from the US and from the UK. We've seen outright attacks on people using social media, but also taking that into real life. So surges in hate crimes. I mean, there's the UK trans support group Mermaids. They've had to limit their phone hotline because their staff is getting so harassed by people calling in. So, and I mean, we've seen that in the US as well with the organization, the Trevor Project has also been targeted by callers who are flooding these support services with messages. And I mean, what are you trying to do then? You're trying to limit access for people who are in crisis, who are reaching out for support to a nonprofit that's providing this help that people need, including preventing people from trying to kill themselves. And hateful people are flooding these services, making them more inaccessible. I mean, that is a real life problem and a horrible, horrible push to, as you said, like energize people. And I mean, what they do with their energy is just, it's hateful. And so it really does have real life consequences.
So, should social media have more guardrails on the platforms that we're all on?
I definitely think that it's important that social media platforms do not allow this kind of excessive hate. And I mean, we see this is a global problem. And clearly, the sort of the AI monitoring of hate is not enough. And I've heard from so many people who have reported really significant levels of hate, and they're not being heard. It's very difficult to get materials taken down or taken off these platforms. And unfortunately, of course, I mean, the side that are spewing this hate, they are using the same platforms to organize and coordinate hate attacks.
Yeah. Public opinion, though, I'm going to cite a Pew study that was done recently, I think in May this year, that said 64% of respondents said they favored protecting transgender people from discrimination in jobs, in housing, and in most other settings. However, 50% of those same respondents said that they favor laws that require trans people to play on sports teams that match the gender that's on their birth certificate. What is your organization and organizations like yours doing to shift public opinion?
I mean, I think shifting public opinion is critical. And I mean, we've known for a long time that when you know someone who is LGBTIQ, you have more tolerance and acceptance. And so I think that the visibility is a critical piece, because maybe not everyone has a neighbor that they know, or a friend that they know, or a coworker that they know. So having visibility through media, and also, of course, companies, making their colleagues visible, I think those are some of the critical elements when it comes to shifting this narrative. I also think that, I mean, it's it's important, and I'm not sure if everyone who has responded in this survey sort of understand the consequence. I feel like a lot of the discussions around sport, it really has been like, oh, how do we exclude people, how do we exclude people? Like, it really should be about how can we make sports as inclusive as possible. And I think that it's critical to shift those narratives to, because I mean, wouldn't we, I mean, when it comes down to it, don't we all want to live in a society that is inclusive? And how can we make it so? And I mean, I think that it's a responsibility of everyone, including governments, including nonprofits like Outright, and many others. And it really is the charge to all of us to promote inclusion.
You sort of touched upon the theme of the day, which is building a fair future. What role do you think business and business leaders have in being more inclusive to transgender people or employees?
I really think that businesses have a critical role to play. And I think this is something that, I mean, I'm from Sweden originally. I saw sort of Swedish laws change, and didn't initially, personally, I wasn't sure, like, do businesses have a role? Isn't it like legislation that should fix everything? And of course, with more experience and seeing the context in different countries, I've come to realize that actually no, it is not. You can't wait for legislation to fix everything. And you have too many situations where legislators are not willing to do something that they feel is risky for them. Businesses speaking out and living their values, I think, is critical. It contributes to visibility. It allows people to not be discriminated, at least at work. And I think that businesses can make this visible and also show that there are some, you'll hear sort of fake arguments that somehow this will hurt businesses, or it will hurt other people or whatever. Inclusion doesn't hurt anyone. It just makes people feel included, makes them be part of the workforce, allows them to be themselves at work and contribute. And I really think that businesses can be more vocal around this, and they can create this visibility that is sorely needed. Not saying that, you should never force anyone to be out if they don't want to be out, but you should create a situation where everyone who wants to can be out. And you should make sure that that does not hurt people's careers. You should use that in your in your publicity. You should be visible, and I think that really is an important piece that businesses can take on.
Sure. We're running out of time, but I have time for one last question, which is you had a global organization. Are you seeing any bright spots or policies right now that give you hope?
I mean, I think that there are always some bright spots, and that's the thing. It's like not every. It's not a. It's nothing is linear. So progress or pushback is never linear. There are many places where we see pushback, but we also see progress. And I think that a lot of that progress comes from the visibility and organizing of trans and LGBTIQ communities themselves, making ourselves more visible, pushing lawmakers, pushing policymakers, pushing businesses to acknowledge that we exist and we should have the same rights, and we should be included, because otherwise we can't create a fair society. And I think that that is always what I go to for hope, is seeing how we self-organize and put ourselves out there and make ourselves more visible, and somehow we do get society to move.
Maria
Overall,
Sjödin,
I'm optimistic.
that's great to hear. Thank you so much for joining us. It's a pleasure as always.
Thank you so much for having me.